I just realized none of you could hear me.
Oh, yay! Good, because I was getting nervous. But anyway, all right.
Okay, we were just discussing technical glitches and we just had one. So welcome everyone. If you couldn't read my lips before, I'm Jana Irwin, Head of Education at the Ulrich, and welcome. And we are so very happy to have all of you with us today and be able, from the entire staff and myself, happy to be able to gather with you all again, finally. So welcome. And you know, all of you, our members, the Wichita community, the campus community are the heart of the Ulrich, and you give purpose and meaning to everything that we do. So again, so happy you're all here. And please go to our website and register for the other 23 Ulrich virtual programs we have in the lineup now through November. So I'm going to go through a few Zoom instructions for our Q&A. So following Alice's talk, we will have a question and answer session that all of you can participate in. And if you're unfamiliar with Zoom, as many of us have been over the last few months, there's an icon at the bottom of your Zoom controls. Raise your hand. And so if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll send you a notification when it's your turn to ask your question and to turn on your mic, and just turn your mic on, unmute your mic, ask your question, and then when you're done, go ahead and mute your mic again and we'll move on to the next question. I think that's it. And in the chat section, if you've got questions, just chat, just type it in, it'll come right to me and I'll help you out. All right. Everyone, please welcome Ksenia Gerstein, curator of modern and contemporary art, who will introduce Alice.
All right, is it working? I hope so. Hi, everyone. First, I want to echo Jana's sentiments that we're so happy to virtually see you, know that you're out there in the world, and to be doing programming again. So tonight, it is my great pleasure to introduce Alice Aycock, who is our very first speaker in a series of Ulrich virtual programs that accompany the Ulrich plus Artists plus You Community Billboard project. The billboard with Alice's work will go up this coming Monday, August 3rd at 1619 North Rock Road in Northeast Wichita. And we really hope that all of you will make a trip out to see it. If you have any questions about the Billboard project, about where they are, looking for more information on them, please go to our newly redesigned, really beautiful and very user-friendly website with the same address as the old one, ulrich.wichita.edu. So even more excitingly, next Tuesday, August 4th, Alice's sculpture Twister Grande Tall will be installed on the WSU campus as the 81st piece in the Martin H. Bush Outdoor Sculpture Collection. It's a major commission for us, and its arrival on campus will be the consummation of over a year of work between us at the Ulrich, and particularly our director, Leslie Brothers, Alice's studio, and with the help from the Ulrich Advisory Board and the WSU Foundation. So if you're interested in seeing the actual physical sculpture being installed, that will be possible. You can come join us at 8 a.m. next Tuesday. It's an outdoor event. We'll be observing all the necessary COVID precautions. And again, if you want to have more information, go to the website, go to the event section, it's all there. Finally, we also currently have an exhibition titled Alice Aycock in the Studio on view in the Gravely Gallery at the museum, and it contextualizes Twister Grande Tall and showcases a number of Alice's really beautiful drawings that kind of connect to the sculpture and to her larger practice over the last decade. The exhibition can be seen by appointment only. If you want to see it, give us a call or send us an email. All the contact information is on our website. And you can also, if you want to learn more before you go, hopefully many of you have gotten the most recent edition of the Ulrich Update in the mail. And there's a lot of information in there on the exhibition, the Sculpture Commission, and Alice's work more generally. So with all those preliminaries out of the way, tonight we're really fortunate to have Alice with us to talk about the ideas and inspirations behind the sculpture that will be installed next week, and the works on view in the museum. So Alice Aycock was the 2018 recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award in Contemporary Sculpture from the International Sculpture Center, which is one of the many testaments to her significance in the field of contemporary sculpture. She's lived in New York City since 1968, and in the 1970s, she participated in the post-minimalist and land art movements that today we consider foundational for the directions that contemporary art would take in subsequent decades. Also, since the 70s, Aycock has been engaging in pioneering ways with ideas from science and engineering that helped her create her influential body of sculptural work. Are now permanently installed in public spaces in New York City, San Francisco, Toronto, and Nashville, among many others. Her installation in Nashville, titled Ghost Ballet for the East Bank Machine Works, received the American Arts Public Art Award in 2008. And her work can also be found in numerous museum collections on walls. And those include MoMA, the Whitney and the Brooklyn Museum in New York, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the National Gallery of Art, Storm King Arts Center, and the Sprengel Museum in Hanover, Germany. She has also exhibited at the Venice Biennial, the Whitney Biennial, and 2 different editions of Documenta. And this is just a small fraction of Alice's CV. I'm not gonna go on all night because I think that you guys will enjoy actually hearing Alice talk a lot more. The last thing I will say before I go is that on behalf of everyone at the Ulrich, I really want to thank the donors and funders who make our work possible. We're very grateful to the Fidelity Bank Foundation, Lou and Terry Heldman, George and Eleanor Lucas, and Lee and Ron Starkle for the funds that they contributed for the acquisition of Twister Grande Tall. And we also deeply appreciate the grant we received from the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission, which awarded us, National Endowment for the Arts funding for the community billboard project that I mentioned at the very beginning. So I think those are all the remarks from me. And without further ado, I'll mute and disappear myself and hand the screen over to Alice.
Okay. So, start video. So start video. Hello. Okay. Start video. Okay. Now, can people see me? I hope. I'm going to do the screen share and begin my conversation. And let's get this going. Do people hear me? Will somebody tell me that, Ksenia or someone? That, yes.
You're good.
All right.
And you can see your screen. So yeah, you're good to go.
I'm good to go. All right. So I would just like to say that I'm very, very happy to have my work at the museum. And I want to thank everyone who's made it possible. Leslie has worked very hard to have this happen, and Ksenia wrote an extraordinary essay in that catalog that she held up, which I would love to publish and republish. And so thank you both so much. And also the donors and everyone who's making this possible. With that, I will tell you a little bit about, I'm going to give you a brief history of how I got to Twister Grande Tall. And it goes way back in time to the early 70s when there was a lot of art called earth art going on and process art. And artists were interested in not making objects, but in actually undercutting the notion of objects and making installations and making things that did more than just, they couldn't be acquired, so to speak. So one of the very early pieces is on the left. It's called Sand Fans. And what I did is I set up a bunch of fans around a big pile, 4,000 pounds of sand. And I wanted to create a dust devil. And I wanted something to happen in time and to somehow replicate nature and put something out there, set up what I would call the necessary structure, and then the contingent event is whatever happened. Now I hoped I would make a little dust devil, which actually eventually ended up being Twister Grande tall. But instead what happened, and it's always a surprise when you do something as an experiment, was the sand just slowly blew away and made dunes, and then just blew over and wore away the pile of sand. And so it was a piece I think I did in 1971. And for some reason, I resurrected that piece in 2008. And since that time, it's been shown over and over and over. And so in a way, I always show this piece because it really is the beginning of the Twisters. I was a very young artist at the time, and I never thought that anyone would really ever care about it. It went into a sort of series of photographs somewhere and into a pile of let's forget. And then someone suggested that we resurrect it. And from there on, it's appeared in many different places and been installed very frequently. And it is the beginning of my obsession with wind and creating a certain kind, dealing with these sort of, let's call them unseen forces that are all around us. And the other piece that was done around that time is called and I had come back from a trip to the West, and it was the early 70s, and I had seen all this cracked earth. And so I took a bunch of clay and I mixed it with water and I poured it out, and over a period of weeks, it made these cracks on the surface. And I was again interested in starting some process and then backing away and letting it happen on its own. And that was now we have to keep, hopefully, all right. So that period for me was a very short-lived period because I also loved architecture. And I was traveling around Europe and Greece, and I was thinking about buildings and architecture that had been sited in the earth and spoke to nature, which was happening with the temples in Greece. But I was thinking about the early labyrinths, and so I went out and I built this labyrinth maze. It's called Maze. It's a photograph from above that the local police took, and I built it like a fence. And basically, I learned how to build that way, just going out, getting some people that show me how to sort of lay things out, how to plumb things up. And then, well, how do you make this? Well, let's build it like a fence in the easiest way. I put it out in some farmland that I had access to. In the meantime, Robert Smithson, a few years later, was making the spiral jetty, and Kaiser was doing all his things, and Terrell and all the guys were doing these big, big, big things. And I thought, well, I'm going to build this anyway on a little farm in Pennsylvania. And so I did. And then all these people came to see it. And so the swirl around it was worn by all the kids that would come out and use it. And what happened for me is I realized I was going to build this thing and I could spend the rest of my life maintaining it, or I could just put it there. It would last. People would sort of find it and then it would disappear. But that began the beginning of my getting just small commissions to build things. And I had access to this farm. not unlike the farmlands around Wichita. And so I began in the summers, and I was just out of graduate school, to go back to Pennsylvania and to build these little structures. And what I wanted to do with these pieces was, I was looking at architecture. I was looking at the little sod houses in the Midwest. I was looking at actually early Greek architecture that was built into hills. And that I wanted to make something, because what was the purpose of these things? And there was no purpose. They were the spaces. And so I had to give them a certain kind of quality, which was not sort of comfortable spaces, but spaces that would impinge on you physically in some way, that you would have to crouch down or crawl through. And so the piece on the top is called Low Building with Dirt Roof. And it's a little sod house. And again, it was built, it kind of disappeared, and then it was rebuilt in Storm King in the 90s. So I kept all the drawings for these pieces that would kind of disappear, but I had the photographs and the drawings, and then eventually, as the years went on, I could build them permanently. The piece below was built for an exhibition in New Jersey, and it's an underground piece. And I wanted you to crawl underground from light to dark. And what I had access to were basic construction materials. Nothing fancy, concrete block, just basic wood, field stone, whatever. And in this case, it was concrete block. And I wanted you to see these openings on the surface of the earth, and the ladders kind of encouraged you to go down. And when you got down inside, you would crawl around from light to dark, light to dark. And again, that piece was rebuilt now at Art Oh My. So a lot of these early pieces that kind of disappeared, but I saved the drawings, we reconstructed exactly the way they were first made. In the beginning, I was just a young artist and was trying to make a name for myself. But basically, it was the period where you would build something somewhere, and then the only way that the public, the audience saw through photographs. This is another one of those pieces. It looks like a silo. And there was a ladder that you could go up, and then you would look down, and you would circumnavigate going down, 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 walking around these thin walls. And mostly, no one saw these pieces except as photographs originally. So I very quickly left the kind of experimental work where I would start a process off, and I jumped into architecture. And there are certain elements that go through a lot of my work. Steps are one of them. Circular composition is another one. Spirals, and the notion of something that's spiraling, and in the spiral can make a kind of references wind or the solar system or whatever. In this case, these steps, which I use over and over in work, they're steep, but you walk all the way up to the ceiling. And once again, there's steps to nowhere. As you get up and up and up and up, you have to cross the ceiling impinges on you. So these steps, which once again were built years ago in the early part of my career, are now being rebuilt for exhibitions in different galleries and museums and around the world. These are two pieces acquired by MoMA and the Whitney in the mid to late 70s, when I was really into architecture as a muse, and looking at architecture and kind of making them in a kind of home-built way. But what I had seen was the cover of Scientific American, in which there was a windmill, and it was a medieval windmill drawn as a painting. And what the article in Scientific American was about the relationship between wind and the use of wind and the harnessing of wind power, which was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So I made this little house, which is kind of like a shanty. And I thought about the early structures that people lived in, which are shacks and shanties, that they made their own buildings, their own architecture, their own wood architecture, which is very American, actually. building in wood because we had so much of it, at least in the Northeast and parts of the country. And then, and so it's called Medieval Wheelhouse Untitled Shanty. And I was making these things almost as homage to industry and thinking. I would always have these big ideas. What's the relationship of industry to art? What's industrial architecture? What's the relationship of, for instance, turbines? But we'll get to it. And the windmill, and how does that harness? Once we harness the wind, then we have power. And so then these are other architectural pieces that I made in the late 70s and early 80s. And always they would have something about them that would be, you didn't just look at them, you had to traverse them. And it was a journey, and it was a difficult journey. So in this case, the one piece on the left, which was at a place called Art Park, again, artists would be invited there. They would, they'd be given some money and some equipment, and they'd build something, and then it would disappear the next year. But you could, there was a certain freedom in that because you could really experiment. And the piece on, and so the vertical piece is a labyrinth. You go from door opening to ladder and you crawl through. It's a kind of aerial ballet labyrinth. The piece on the right is called 100 Small Rooms, and it also is an interior labyrinth where you have to find your way through the building, crawling up and up and up. And so what I was trying to do was to give these, now I can see myself on the right, but do you all just see the screen as opposed to everybody? I don't know. I hope that I'm not masking the work. I'd like to make myself pretty small somehow if I can, but I don't want to mute myself. Anyway, so I would, at the same time, I would do a lot of drawings because there were many things, many ideas I had that I couldn't build. And some of the ideas, if I did build them, I mean, they're crazy ideas. And so I imagined this structure in the desert, and you would have to build a ladder to get to that door in the sky or in the building, embedded in the building. And as you jump down from step to step to step to step, you would gradually entomb yourself. It was just an idea. Now, I realized a couple weeks ago when I was working with another crazy stair idea that as a young woman, I had this dream that I was building these stairs, and every time they'd get to a certain point, they'd fall apart and I'd have to start all over again. So I think sometimes the origin of one's art is not only in their childhood, but also in their dreams and whatever. On the right, there's a garden of scripts. And so I use drawing frequently as a way, in the garden of scripts, write these different writings that were that I couldn't understand from history, and there's hieroglyphs, and there's cuneiform, Mesopotamian cuneiform, and all sorts of different writings, and I made them into kind of a topiary, like a garden, like you would walk through these garden topiaries, and they would be built on all of this writing that has more or less disappeared in time. Now I'm going to go quickly because I don't want to, it's just giving you a sense of a career. So you start out as a young artist in the 70s, you make early work that is about, let's say, wind and things that are very transient, but it's still this thinking about wind power. And then you move into architecture, and I made these structures. Some of them you would just look at. Others could be performance spaces. They were built all in galleries and museum spaces. And then through the 70s, the one on the left is called The Machine That Makes the World. And you're led through these steel doors to a labyrinth in the back, and the walls move, and then you're led back out. And the one on the right is called 1001 Nights in the Mansion of Bliss. I started to think about what is a form that is a kind of generic form that animates, that underlies everything. What would it be? And so I thought it's a kind of spinning sort of turbine form, which is like the fan blades, but it's also a little bit about the way spiral galaxies and the way the wind moves. When you look down on, you have photographs of the Earth from above and you see these incredible sort of hurricanes and wind movement, and they're very beautiful. They're frightening, but they're very beautiful. So the 1001 Nights started back on this interest once again in industrial architecture and in tool making and invention. And it really interested me that there was this kind of intertwining, wrapping around like the DNA between a tool that's invented and it pushes us forward, but it also can be used in a very destructive way. And I also have an obsession with amusement parks, because it's almost like it's where amusement parks give human beings access to the machine. And it also gives human beings, when they're working well, this sense of levitation, of hurling themselves into space, which is another thing that I think we all do. We all kind of do. We all wish we could fly. I know I do. So I'm going to try to move a little through these images just to give you a sense of, this is the mid-80s and the 90s. Some of these started to be on the left, there's Storm King, and you can see how I use steps and bowls set upon bowl upon things, that steps and bowls and curves and theaters. This was taken from some diagrams of theaters. And on the right, that's the San Francisco Library, where you have this kind of vortex form that has sort of inserted itself into the wall of the library. More drawings. And what drawings do for me is, when I'm building these pieces, I dream them up. It's really fun. And then I have to get them built. And that's not so much fun, because it's work, it's planning, it's tedious, and sometimes it takes years. And there's always, you're working with teams of people, and sometimes you make proposals and they don't get accepted and your dreams get shattered. But when I'm in the studio making my drawings, I can fantasize anything I want. It's under my control. So it's another sort of practice, and it's more like it's my kind of imaginary world and maybe even my world of thinking about history and thinking about all kinds of things that in the art, in the sculpture, is less obvious, but these are the ways of getting to the sculpture. And so these are other drawings and where I can kind of roam through history and roam through art history and roam through architecture. And you can see that these notions, in some cases with the one on the left, on the lower left, again, you sense this vortex and this house hovering above this vortex of steps. Two pieces, eventually I began to get big commissions in very large public places. On the left, you have the East River in New York City off JFK. And I had to make something that would somehow speak to New York City, the scale of New York City. Well, that's impossible, at least for me. But what I wanted to do is to speak at least to the energy of the city. So there are all these spirals, and when you do see this piece as a drive-by experience, when you're in traffic, especially stopped, and this is the aerial view looking down on it. But when you're below looking up at it, it does have some scale and presence. The piece on the right is Nashville, and that piece is about 125 feet in the air. And what I wanted was to have the feeling that the bridges, and there are a lot of bridges on that river, I took elements from those bridges, they were thrown up in the sky, and then they're hurled down two big trusses, and they're having a conversation, and it's sort of like stop action. And again, I had to relate to the scale of the city. And sometimes these big trusses you're able to get a lot of use a lot of visual space. And with all the openings in between, you can get a lot of, let's say, bang for your buck, so to speak. Other times I've used, so I move, some artists have a vocabulary and they stick with it through their entire 40 or 50-year career. I knew that that wasn't going to be me, that I wanted some ideas that were, as a young artist, that would that would be a big question, and I would keep going down paths. And some of those paths would lead me somewhere, and others of those paths would not. But occasionally I like working with light. And on the left, this is a gymnasium in New Jersey at a Ramapo College. It's called the Star Sifter. And I really got into this notion of, on the upper left, you can see this kind of, a sort of blade turbine thing that's supposed to be sifting the stars. Obviously, I like satellites. I adore satellites. They're things that I just like. Satellite dishes, amusement parks, jet engines, things like that. I don't know, they just, cranes. I look at them and I go, whoa, that's kind of like a piece of art. And on the right, it's Dulles Airport, and it's a suspended work. And this work has many of the elements now that you would find in your Twister. This is Kansas City at the airport. It's a big vortex, and you're out there on the plane. It's very flat. It's the parking lot, I don't know whether it's there at the moment, but it's a long-term parking lot. And I thought, okay, you come back from a really, really long flight. You're really tired. The bus drops you off, and there's this big vortex in the night sitting there going, where did this come from? Did it land from outer space? So I also love sci-fi images. On the right, it's another, you can see this kind of vortex-like form that looks like it's searching the sky, and it can build. So this is kind of an outlier, but it's really not. It was built for Coral Gables in a couple of years ago, I forget the year, but 2 or 3 years ago. And I was very interested in a certain kind of flower form, which I was trying to raise, and it's gone out of my head right now, but it's a particular kind of flower that looks a lot like a satellite. And so I enlarged it, and I made it into this form it's about 30 some feet tall, this sculpture. And it sits in the center of a roundabout. And lots of roundabouts make really good places for sculpture. And it's sort of, and what I did is when it was enlarged, it's a passion flower. When it enlarges itself, and then I gave it a kind of sci-fi reference. So it's almost as though nature is going to step off its platform and devour you. And wouldn't that be nice in a way if it did? More drawings, the drawings now begin to talk about twisters and whirlpools and turbulence and tornadoes. And all along I was looking at tornadoes and the structure of tornadoes and weather patterns. And we all know things are scary. They're frightening. We don't want a tornado to go through our house. But at the same time, they're beautiful. And so it's that interdigitation between looking at nature, and nature can be overpowering, and it can be terrifying, but it can also be beautiful, and we harness it. And we're trying desperately now to figure out how to harness it for good. And it does its thing. Nature will always be what nature is. In any case, so These are pieces that were originally designed for certain places on Park Avenue, certain streets on Park Avenue where they put sculpture. And I took the theme, it's called Park Avenue Paper Chase. And I imagined that there was paper that was, that the wind was just taking it down the avenue, and it was leaving debris piling up in certain forms and making whirlwinds. And other times the wind was actually being visualized by the sculpture. And so it's a series of works that go down the avenue. And this was there, but it also looked this is about 30 some feet tall, 32 feet, no, 28 feet tall. You're seeing this in a garden, Chatsworth, a garden estate outside of London. So where every leaf is perfect. I'm going to tell a story which maybe will humanize this a little bit before I get to our twister. When I was in probably junior high, and it was nighttime, and everyone in the house was asleep, and I woke up, and I was on the ground floor, and I could hear the wind, and it was February, and for some reason, sometimes February will get very warm for a few days, and I think it's necessary actually for the fruit trees, but at any rate, it was a warm night, and the wind was just so powerful, and I got out of bed, and I went to the window, and I opened it, and I jumped out. And it was nighttime, and I danced on my front lawn for, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes, all by myself, with no one seeing it, just dancing to the wind, letting the wind tell me what to do. It was an extraordinarily euphoric moment for a young girl. It was very free, and it was just amazingly euphoric. And I think sometimes when I started to make these works, which are about a certain kind of real power that a hurricane or a tornado can have, or a jet engine, at the same time, there's also this sort of euphoria. And I think we all know what it feels like to be in the wind, and what that feels like and how powerful it can be. So I started this series of twisters, which are called the Turbulence series. And they're different. Each piece is somewhat different, a different kind of analysis of hurricanes and twisters. This is the crew, so that you can, the guy at the very, very top of this is the guy who runs the shop, whose company it is, who works for me and builds these things. And this is the group of people who work on them and build them, and are amazing group of young people. This piece is called Maelstrom, and instead of it being vertical, it's horizontal, and it really is taken from waves and wind and vortexes of energy. And this particular piece is about 80 feet long, and it's in front of MGM's casino outside of DC. This is in Toronto, so on the waterfront. And I started to want to make things that also zig and zag and don't just, this is in someone's garden in Louisville, Kentucky. So there are variations on the twister theme. This one is called Devil Whirl, and it zigs and zags, and it's really like a dance movement. And this is called Untitled Cyclone. It's smaller, more contained, and along with turbines and jet engines and amusement parks, I love flying saucers and spinning tops. And this is down in Texas somewhere. And I will take some of the images for these pieces from wherever I find them. It can be a tornado, it could be a cartoon. I'm gonna not talk about this, well, I don't know what time it is, because I'm trying to breeze through this. So I think we're gonna quickly go to why I'm having the talk. And this is Twister Grande Tall. This is how things start out in my studio. And I work on a computer, and first it's a series of lines, and then it gets rendered and looked at from every point of view, and analyzed and thought about and moved around and played with. And I drive my studio assistants crazy. No, move that. No, that's wrong. No, throw that out. No, that's not working. And then at some point, I say, all right, we're going to let it go. And then it goes to the shop in Fort Lauderdale. And this is just showing the piece as it's being made, but at this point, it's really pretty far along in its fabrication. It gets engineered for the site, for the wind, for its base, for everything about the site. And so you can see this in process in Fort Lauderdale at the shop. And it always looks exactly as I've designed it in the studio. And that's one of the marvelous things about computer technology. Once I settle on something and I mess with it, maybe for weeks and weeks and sometimes for months in the studio, and then it goes, then it is built exactly the way I've designed it. And then you just get to see some of the boring parts probably, but this is what has to happen. The art is maybe it seems as though I twirl my fingers, which I do, but then it gets down to the nitty gritty and everything has to be done, signed off on. Really, it's like, it's the real world, and you know, it's the real world. So I'm just showing this for interest's sake, and how it gets loaded on the truck. Things have to be designed so it's not a wide load, so it can fit on a truck. And it's very much nuts and bolts of construction. And this is what's going to happen. And then here's the piece on the site, sort of. We've got some trees. This is the original where the trees are there. But this is what you're going to get in about, I don't know, a week, 10 days, I can't remember exactly. So with that, I am going to now turn it over to the Q&A, and I'm not sure where to go. Leslie, do you want to take it from here? Do you want to image, or what do you want to do?
So I think Jana asked, I think Jana can see if people have questions, if you raise your hand, or I think you have that option at the bottom of your screen, or you can just type in the questions in the chat. But we'd really love to hear from all of you. And this is unfortunately, you know, because of this virus that we're living with, Alice won't be here for the installation. So this is the opportunity to talk to her, ask her questions about anything. So I'm thinking, Jana, are you?
Leslie, Leslie, we have a question from Don. He's turning his mic on right now.
Oh, great.
All right. If you can hear me.
We can.
Ms. Aycock, I'm a volunteer docent at the museum, and I'll be guiding one of these days, we hope, some student tours. So I guess the questions I would have is do you have any takeaways, that there are certain things you would like the students to notice? I mean, being from Kansas, many of these students have probably actually seen a real live twister of their own, and of course we live with Dorothy and Toto and everybody else.
I know.
Quite often, but
yeah, right. Well, I think the thing I might say to them is, maybe this is a little too nerdy, but this relationship between art and nature and technology, and I see it as this incredible sort of journey that starts, and that started like maybe with the Arrowhead or something, where human beings start to have some control over their surroundings. They're not just picking berries. And we don't know quite what that journey was, but if you would say to them that part of what I'm trying to think about when I make this work is what is that journey and how do we respond to nature and to the power of nature, and how do we harness it, it's the obvious issue is the environmental crisis that we're in, but I don't want the art to be, just an obvious thing like that. But I would say that for me, the sense of wind, both as an industrial technological tool, which it is, that's one path, and the other is dance movement, the movement inside your body, the sense of euphoria, and also the sense of, as young students, of fear and panic, and this tumultuous moment, which you sometimes can feel inside your body. I mean, I know I do. And so these pieces embody a lot of different things within that sort of area. They don't mean everything about everything, but you can start with the sense of dance and spinning and ice skating, and you can move to the harnessing of wind power, to a jet engine, to the tornado, and then come right back down again to yourself.
Okay, during your talk, you gave me an idea, which was this also represents a visual image of what the swirling winds would look like. They might otherwise be invisible without this image, and so they can see that. Plus, my grade school students will love being twisters of their own. I'm sure I can invite them to spin around and be twisters, and they'll love it.
Well, they played with spinning tops, and spinning tops are the sort of scientific toy that you give all children. And that motion, that kind of motion is what underlies so much of the universe, whether it's a solar system or a hurricane or a child's toy. So you can talk to them about that. And you could also say that most artists throughout time have been fascinated by wind. So you look at clothes or, blowing in the wind, because that's the only way you can see it, is as it moves through something else.
Right.
I think these will be the easy ones.
Thank you. When you have done any of these pieces, is there anything that people have seen in them that maybe you didn't anticipate, that maybe surprised you that somebody saw something in it?
Well, I'm going to make a joke because I have a kind of cynical sense of humor, but I do know that I was asked to make a presentation for some corporate headquarters somewhere, and they all freaked out. They thought everyone would think that they were chaotic and disorganized out on there. So I didn't expect people to get that obviously literal about things. That's not necessary. In other words, what we try to do is not sort of read into things too much. But yes, yes and no. Let me say that now I'm putting my foot in my mouth, but the notion of chaos, there is no such thing as chaos. If we can design it, then it's controlled. All right, it's ordered. But this is a different kind of order. And it actually, to me, is the order that, to be honest with you, that the world runs on. Not really the order that we try to impose on it. I don't know if that's answering your question, but I suppose what I'm trying to say, and I'm not answering your question, what I'm trying to say is that underneath everything, there is this other order, which we're experiencing at the moment, where something comes in that we didn't expect and it disrupts our beliefs, and we have to figure a new way of how to live. But underneath it all, it's an organizational system that has always been there. So that's not answering your question, but that's for the grown-ups, not the kids.
Well, we've got a few questions that have come in. Don, do you mind if I read some of these?
Leslie Skokin has had her hand raised, so could she ask her question and then we'll go ahead and move on to the typed in questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ellie?
Thanks, Jana. We're just sitting here watching this and looking at all these motions and talking about vortexes, and we say, Allen Ginsberg, are you familiar with Wichita Vortex Sutra by Allen Ginsberg?
No, I'm not, but I am familiar with Allen Ginsberg, and so I'll Google it when we
Check it out.
we'll definitely do that.
It was a big part of the beat culture, and Wichita was part of that.
Okay. Well, for sure. And I think that culture, well, anyway, we'll leave it at that, but it's certainly a favorite of mine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Ellie. Jana, do you want me to go ahead and read these?
Yes, go ahead. And I also have one that's come in on my phone, so.
Oh,
we'll do
okay.
that when you're done.
All right, so Connie Bonfoy has a question. How do you stay out of your head when you dream these things? Has that been a danger for you to overthink your process?
When I was younger, and I'm going to say something that, let's see how I go about this. When I was younger, it was much harder to, it was both, to be perfectly honest, there was this incredible pull to be in your head and to let your imagination just take you away. And then it would become difficult. And, but as I grew older, I got somewhat more able to separate out the madness, and I would say madness, from how I had to live the rest of my life. So I am able now to make a partition. But when I was younger, it was much harder to make that partition. But the work was where I would put everything that was happening to me, and I still do. It's just that it's a little less visceral than it used to be, and probably for the better. But sometimes I long for that earlier time, but I know that I can't go there anymore. How's that for an answer?
Okay, we have a question from Lee Starkle. It was fascinating to see your work in color because I was only familiar with your work in white or silver. Can you talk more about the use of color? And also, I'd like to hear more about the drawing you sped by, a building on a spiral.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
All right. I could flip back to that if you want. I have certain things that I really enjoy putting color in the drawings. And while I might never make a sculpture red, although I do have a big red piece that I want to make out of the waltzing out of Matilda, but blues really, I love blues and a certain kind of blue. Is this the drawing that I all right, so I'll tell the story very fast. There are certain buildings in India, observatories, that all my life I looked at but I never got to see in person. In 2008, I finally got to India to see the observatories, and I was I was in Jaipur, where there's an observatory, and there's also an incredible gate, which is the entrance to the old city of Jaipur. And it's just like window after window after window. And it's an extraordinary, and if you Google, I can never pronounce it, but if you Google entrance to the old city of Jaipur, it will come up right away. It's pink. It's just beautiful. And it was where the women in the harem, they could never go out into the world, but they would look out at the world from behind that gate. And so when I got there, and Jaipur is just insane. It's like the way New York City streets used to be. And people running all around, and it's crazy. And the taxi driver kept wanting to take me to a souvenir shop. And I said to him, please leave me alone. I've come here. I've thought about this all my life. Leave me just for 5 or 10 minutes to stare at this beautiful building. I will never be here again. So I'm standing in the street and I feel this tug on my blouse. And I'm thinking, oh, would somebody just leave me alone for a tiny little bit while I stare at this beautiful, beautiful work of art? And the tug kept coming. And I turned. There was a young girl. Now, this is a sad story. There was a young girl. She was probably about 16 or 17. And she had a very ended stomach. And she had a scar that ran from the top of her throat all the way down her body. Somebody had cut her in two, but it was healed, sort of. And that's all she had in the world to offer. That was it. And I'm standing there looking at the most beautiful, and here's this young girl. And I thought, this is why I came to India. I came for her, not just for the building or the this or that. I came to see her. So I went home and I made this drawing for her. And it is the building over and over and over and over again, behind all those folds of clothes or blown drapery or whatever. And it's about, I think, 8 or 10 feet tall, I forget. It took me about a year. And it's why I make art, basically. So that's the story. You asked, there it is. I didn't want to tell a sad story tonight, but in fact, it is why people make art, to give something in the world, to put something into the world as an offering when they are powerless and they're almost mute in the face of something that you can't control or verbalize, but you want to remember in some way. And it really is for her. She'll never know it. It won't make a difference in her world, but I had to do it. So, all right. Does that answer the question?
Well, Alice, I want to say that your piece will make a difference in ours. I was new to this university and I had been looking at Wichita State from a distance. And I was really, really impressed by what was happening on campus and by the leadership of the then president, President Bardo, and how the university was really transforming itself in time and moving forward at a great rate. And when I got here and I had the opportunity to propose a sculpture for the collection, and I had been following you since I was an undergraduate student, right? You didn't know this, but we've had a long, long relationship, and where we've, kind of connected again without you knowing over time at the Cranner and now here. And I saw that the work you were doing, and I thought, if we're going to add something to the campus and to the East Campus, to this innovation campus, it has to be something that propels us constantly into the future. And there it was. There it was, waiting for us. This timeless piece that represents the past as much as where we're going. So I just want to thank you for that and tell you what an honor it is to be working with you, for me and all of us. So thank you for that. And I don't mean to interrupt the questions because I know there are more. Jana, do you have one on your phone that you'd like to share, or?
Ruth Ann and Scott are watching, and Ruth is curious about the basis behind the color choices that you make. What drives your color choices?
Well, in the case of the twisters, it's the way it catches the light. And so when the sun is out, it really, really hits all of the ribbons, and it just sort of, everything just kind of pops. And what you look at when the twisters is that you look at the form, and that's really what it's about. And that while I do like the industrial quality of the silver, and they feel very raw and rugged and more aggressive when they're silver, but it's very hard to maintain too, because it powders out. When I am making other types, I mean, in some cases, I guess I didn't show all the blue, particular preference for blue. It's got a little purple in it. And I suppose when I'm interested in color choices, yeah, I did do the big Nashville piece because red is industrial, and it really depends on the site and the context. But in the case of the twisters, I want them to pop, and I want them to have probably a dialogue with the sky and with the green around it, and to kind of be out in nature in that way. But it really depends on the context and on the piece that I'm making. It's just the Twister series work best white for whatever reason, I think, for the most part. So I did show some colored pieces, but there I'm using light, neon, and LEDs and all sorts of things. And, it just depends, basically.
So I've got one more question, and then I think, Jana, if it's okay with you, we'll wrap this up. This is from Elaine Bernstorff, and she wants to know if you ever heard of a book called The Storm of Creativity by, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Kanya Lesky, and what you're describing is reflected in the text. And have you written much about your own work? If so, information be available.
I have never heard of that book, but I will look into it. Early on in my career, the first half of my career, I did write a lot. They're kind of fragmented stream of consciousness things that, little stories and chapters, and they're very kind of weird, I guess. But at one point I thought I was going to be a writer. And so those things are published. I guess if you were to see references to them, you'd have to go to the library. I wouldn't suggest, well, there's the book on the parish book, but all these are library books, I think, at this point. I think Yale Press, do you guys have that book? The one that Yale Press published from the parish art show, that's the drawings? Probably have it somewhere. And there's the MIT book, which has excerpts from my writing.
We have both.
You have both. So, I mean, they're, when we can go to the library again, they would be in the library. So that's, both of those will have, and particularly the parish exhibition, which I think was 2013, is very recent, fairly recent, with excerpts. Yep. But what I would really recommend is Ksenia's essay, which I thought was really extraordinary. Frankly, I was really blown away. I'm not just bullshitting you either, Ksenia. I mean it. You hear me? It was really, 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 really. I really want to republish. I'm going to ask you.
And to answer the question, I think what makes the essay great is that it's mostly excerpts from your writing. So that is
now
in some
that makes me seem like an asshole. So
no, but I think I really enjoyed the process. So I did comb through those books and some other sources, but it action. So that is, the essay is a good starting point for finding some of Alice's writings from over a period of many years. And she is a really wonderful writer about her own work. So, but thank you for your kind words as well.
all right.
Well, I want to thank Jane McHugh for sponsoring Alice Aycock in the Studio, the exhibition that Ksenia mentioned that is in the Gravely Gallery. And I want you all to know that on Tuesday, we're going to have someone at the museum there, so that if you want to see the exhibition, you'll be able to do that. So just let us know if you're with us on Tuesday. Let us know that you're heading over, and we'll make sure that you can get into the museum. Alice, thank you so much. This
You're
has just
welcome.
been
Thank
wonderful.
You. And I think I'm actually better in person. But anyway, thanks so much for joining me tonight, and thank you, everybody. And let's keep our fingers crossed that everything goes well. And, we get this bugger up and installed, and there will be. Okay. So.
All right, thanks to everyone who joined us this evening, and we hope to see you again very soon.
Yep. Goodbye.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Alice.